She isn't needed by anyone. My husband said it like he was stating a fact, not confessing a failure. His eyes stayed on the kitchen counter, on the small crack near the sink, anywhere but on the child standing in our hallway. Just send her back, my mother said. Already convinced this was the reasonable solution. She's too much, my mother-in-law added. She'll ruin everything. They were talking about a child. Her name was Mila. She was 8 years old, though nothing about her posture suggested childhood. She stood stiffly near the door, both hands wrapped around the handle of a worn suitcase that looked heavier than it should have been. One wheel was broken, the zipper snagged. Someone had tied it together with a piece of string. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She waited. I remember the sound of the house in that moment. The low hum of the refrigerator. The ticking clock on the wall. My own breathing, shallow and uneven. 4 adults in one room, calmly discussing where to place a human being who had become inconvenient. My husband, Daniel, had brought her home earlier that afternoon without warning. "This is my daughter," he said when he walked in, as if introducing a neighbor I'd simply forgotten to meet. I didn't even know he had a daughter. He explained it quickly, the way people do when they don't want questions. Mila's mother had moved again. New city, new relationship. Mila didn't fit into that life anymore. Daniel's parents were too busy. His sister had her own kids. And after years of distance, Mila had somehow landed here, our hallway. Our problem. She'll stay for a while, Daniel said. Until we figure something out. People say for a while when they have no intention of staying involved. That night, I showed Mila the guest room. She nodded politely, thanked me, and closed the door softly behind her. When I checked on her later, she was asleep on top of the blankets, fully dressed, shoes placed neatly by the bed. Her suitcase was half packed and pushed under the bed, like she expected someone to come back for her. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at that suitcase. Children who believe they belong don't sleep like that. The next morning, she woke before everyone else. I found her sitting at the kitchen table, hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. "Did you sleep okay?" I asked. She nodded. "Yes, ma'am." That word landed heavy in my chest. At breakfast, she barely touched her food. She watched Daniel closely, tracking his mood, his tone. The way he sighed when my sons, 6 and 4 at the time, laughed too loudly. When they ran past her, she flinched, like noise came with consequences. I recognized that look. It's the look of a child who has learned that love is conditional. The first email from school came less than 2 weeks later. Disruptive behavior, difficulty following instructions, argumentative, then another, and another. At home, things started breaking. A cup slipped from her hands. A picture frame fell off the shelf. One afternoon, I caught Mila lifting a ceramic bowl from the counter. She looked at it for a long second, then let it drop. It shattered across the floor. She gasped dramatically. Oops, that's when I understood what was happening. Children who expect to be thrown away push first. They create the rejection before it can surprise them. It feels safer that way. Evenings became exhausting. Homework turned into quiet standoffs. Reading made her tense. Writing froze her completely. Math felt like humiliation. She counted on her fingers with intense focus, jaw clenched, shoulders tight. Every correction felt like proof that she didn't belong. Then the doctor visits began. Glasses first, then therapy referrals. Then a specialist noticed something irregular with her heart and suggested more tests. Suddenly, my calendar filled with waiting rooms, insurance calls, forms that never seemed to end. Strangers looked at me like I was the reason this child carried fear in her body. Daniel worked longer hours. When he was home, he wanted peace. "She listens to you more," he said one night. "Why can't you handle her?" When I tried to explain that Mila wasn't acting out, she was terrified. He waved it away. "You're overthinking it," he said. "She's just hard, as if she were an object." The comments from family followed soon after, dressed up as concern. You already have your own kids. There are programs. She might be better somewhere else. Mila heard more than they realized. One night, I found her asleep on the floor beside her bed. Her suitcase was open, clothes folded neatly inside, shoes lined up. So I'm ready, she said quietly when I asked why. Ready for what? I didn't ask. I already knew. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, a knot tightening in my chest. Somewhere between exhaustion and fear, something became painfully clear. No one in that house was asking what Mila needed. They were asking who was inconvenienced, and I knew deep down that a moment was coming. A moment where staying silent would be the same as agreeing. A moment where I would have to decide whether I was another adult who looked away. I didn't know yet what I would choose, but the suitcase under her bed told me exactly what was at stake. The moment came sooner than I expected. It didn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It came on a quiet afternoon, sunlight stretching across the kitchen floor like nothing important was about to happen. I'm leaving, Daniel said, standing near the counter, his keys already in his hand. I found a place. That was it. No apology, no explanation, just a statement delivered the way people announce a change in plans. I waited for more, for regret, for hesitation, for something human. Instead, he sighed, rubbed his forehead, and said, "There's just one thing we need to talk about." I knew. Mila, he said. Her name hit the air between us and fell heavy. She can't come with me, he continued, speaking faster now, like speed might dull the cruelty. Her mom doesn't want her back. My parents can't take her right now. My sister's overwhelmed. And she's hard. Hard, as if that word explained everything. We're all pretending this is normal, he went on. But it's not. You have your own kids. This isn't your responsibility. That was when I saw her. Mila stood at the edge of the hallway, pressed flat against the wall, eyes wide and unblinking. She had heard every word. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She walked toward me slowly, like she didn't trust her legs to carry her all the way, and wrapped her arms around my waist. "Please," she whispered into my shirt. Her voice was so quiet I almost missed it. "Please don't send me away. I'll be good. I promise. I'll do anything. I just want to stay." Her body shook like fear lived in her bones. In that moment, I didn't see a difficult child. I didn't see a problem to solve. I saw an 8-year-old who understood, far too clearly, that she was being discussed like an unwanted item. I looked at Daniel over her head. "A child isn't a package," I said. My voice didn't shake, and that surprised me. "You don't return her when she becomes inconvenient." He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just went quiet the way people do when they've already decided and don't want to admit it out loud. He left less than an hour later. No yelling, no drama, just the sound of his car pulling away and shrinking down the street until it was gone. Mila didn't let go of me all evening. She followed me from room to room, sat close on the couch, fell asleep with her head on my shoulder like gravity itself was a threat. I held her and felt how light she was, too light for a child her age. That night, after I tucked her into bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table and stared at the wall. I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified. I had 2 children already. A mortgage. A job that barely left room for emergencies. A child with medical needs and years of neglect behind her. Every practical voice in my head told me I was in over my head. But there are moments in life when practicality feels like cowardice wearing a sensible coat. The next morning, I started making calls. A lawyer, the school, the pediatrician. I learned very quickly that love doesn't grant authority. Paperwork does. Guardianship forms, medical consent, court dates, words that sounded cold but meant safety. Stability, permission to protect. When my family found out what I was doing, the reactions were immediate. "You're ruining your life. my mother said over the phone. This isn't your obligation, my mother-in-law snapped. You already have children, someone else reminded me. They spoke like Mila was a bad investment. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I was too busy doing the unglamorous work of staying. Mila didn't believe me at first. Not really. When I told her she wasn't leaving, she nodded politely, the way children do when they're humoring adults. She kept her suitcase under the bed, half-packed, always ready. At night, she slept lightly. Any noise woke her. Any change in routine made her tense. One evening, I found her sitting on the floor, folding her clothes carefully and placing them back into the suitcase. You don't have to do that, I said gently. She didn't look up. Just in case. Just in case what? She hesitated. Just in case I mess up. I sat down on the floor across from her. You don't get sent away for being a kid, I said. She looked at me then. Really looked at me. Like she was deciding whether those words were dangerous. People always say that, she replied quietly. And then they changed their mind. That was when I understood the depth of the damage. Mila didn't fear punishment. She feared replacement. It took weeks before she tested me, not with tantrums. With honesty, she talked back. She broke a rule. She snapped at one of the boys and then froze, eyes wide, breath held, waiting for the moment she'd be told to pack. I corrected her. I set boundaries, and then I stayed. No raised voice, no threats, no suitcase. That confused her more than anger ever could. One night, after a long day, she stood in the doorway of my bedroom. Are you mad at me? She asked. Yes, I said. But I'm not leaving. She nodded slowly, like she was storing that sentence somewhere important. The first time she pushed her suitcase all the way under the bed, she didn't announce it. She just did it quietly, like she didn't want to tempt fate. I noticed anyway. I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, thinking about the future I had chosen without applause. The exhaustion waiting for me. The fear that I might fail her. But I also knew something else. Once you hear a child beg not to be sent away, you don't get to pretend you didn't hear it. And the next morning, when Mila sat at the kitchen table eating cereal, her feet swinging gently beneath the chair, I understood that everything had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough that there was no going back. Staying didn't feel heroic. It felt repetitive. Every morning I woke up and made the same decision again. Not once, but over and over, even on the days when no one noticed and nothing improved. Especially on those days. Mila didn't transform overnight. If anything, the weeks after Daniel left were harder. Once she realized she wasn't being sent away immediately, her fear didn't disappear. It surfaced in smaller, sharper ways. She argued over rules that barely mattered. She tested boundaries like they were thin glass, tapping them gently, then harder, waiting to see which ones would shatter. She snapped at my boys and then went completely still, eyes wide, breath shallow, bracing for consequences that never quite came the way she expected. When I corrected her calmly, she flinched. When I didn't yell, she looked confused. When I enforced rules without threats, she stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Stability is terrifying to a child who's never had it. School continued to be a struggle. Her teachers called often, frustrated, but concerned. Mila wasn't incapable. She was behind large gaps where foundations should have been. Reading made her shoulders tighten. Writing froze her completely. Math triggered quiet panic. Every evening, we sat together at the kitchen table. Some nights we worked for 10 minutes. Some nights for an hour. Some nights we stared at the same worksheet until tears slid silently down her face. I'm stupid, she whispered once, like she was reciting a fact she'd learned long ago. I corrected it every time. You're not stupid, I said. You're learning. She didn't believe me, but she listened. The medical appointments kept coming. Specialists, tests, more waiting rooms. Mila learned how to sit very still in plastic chairs, hands folded in her lap, eyes tracking me like I was the only solid thing in the room. People stared. They always do when a child carries fear in her body. I learned to ignore it. Daniel sent money through the system. Automatic, consistent, impersonal. He didn't call. He didn't ask about her health or her grades. Mila noticed. She stopped asking about him. That was a quiet kind of grief. Little by little, something began to shift. Mila started hovering near me in the kitchen. She didn't help at first. She watched, studied how I moved, how I reacted when I was tired, how I spoke when I was overwhelmed. She learned when it was safe to talk and when silence felt smarter. One evening, after a long day, I sighed louder than I meant to. When I turned around, Mila was wiping the counter with a paper towel. "I can do it," she said quickly. "So you don't have to." It wasn't defiance. It was an offering. After that, she began doing small things without being asked. Folding towels, feeding the dog, walking the boys outside and running them until they collapsed in the grass, laughing, just to give me 10 minutes of quiet. My sons forgave her faster than any adult ever could. Children don't keep score the way we do. They started waiting for her, asking for her, trusting her. Mila pretended not to care, but I noticed the way her shoulders softened when my youngest fell asleep against her. The anxiety didn't vanish. It lived in her body in the way she startled at sudden noises, in the way she planned for disasters that never came. But it no longer ran the house. One afternoon, months later, I found myself alone for the first time in what felt like forever. The house was quiet. Laundry was miraculously done. The boys were outside. I sat in an armchair with a worn paperback I'd owned since college. Mila wandered in, cheeks flushed from running, grabbed a snack, and stopped when she saw the book. "What are you reading?" she asked. "It's about a man who makes a terrible choice," I said, "and spends the rest of his life paying for it." She thought about that. "Is it sad?" "Yes." "Can you read it out loud?" I warned her it was heavy. She didn't care. So, I read a chapter. Mila listened like someone starving. She didn't fidget. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she let out a long breath. "That was a lot," she said. Then, softer, "Can I try reading?" From that day on, books became her oxygen. She devoured everything. Stories far beyond her grade level. Poems she claimed to hate and then quoted back to me weeks later. Characters she argued with like they were real people. She felt everything too deeply, and words gave those feelings somewhere to land. One evening, she hovered in the doorway holding a thick notebook like it might explode. "Don't laugh," she said. I opened it. The writing was uneven, awkward in places, messy, but beneath it was something undeniable. A voice, raw, observant, honest. "This is good," I said. Her shoulders dropped like she'd been holding them up for years. I took the notebook to her school, hoping for a writing club, a mentor, anything. The teacher skimmed a few pages and smiled politely. "This is cute," she said. "Kids write like this all the time. They usually lose interest once it gets hard." I smiled back and thanked her. In the car, I sat for a long moment before starting the engine. If the system shrugged, I would build something else. I found a small writing program through the local library. Workshops. Mentors. Kids who carried notebooks like lifelines. They read Mila's work and didn't pat her on the head. They took her seriously. She came home from the first session, glowing in a way I hadn't seen before. "They didn't think I was weird," she said. "They said I'm intense, but in a good way." From there, everything changed slowly, and then, all at once, her confidence grew. Her fear loosened its grip. She still struggled. She still had bad days. But she no longer slept with a suitcase half-packed under her bed. One night, months later, I realized I hadn't seen it in a long time. The suitcase was gone, not hidden, not half-packed, gone. When I asked her about it, she shrugged. I don't need it anymore. That was when I understood something important. Healing doesn't announce itself. It happens quietly, in the moments you stop preparing to leave. Time didn't announce itself. It slid forward quietly, marked by pencil lines on a wall, by shoes that no longer fit, by sentences that grew longer and more certain. Mila grew taller. Her face changed. The sharpness softened, though the intensity stayed. Fear stopped leading the way, but it still walked beside her, reminding her to prepare, to plan, to never assume permanence. She worked harder than anyone I knew, not because she chased praise, but because rest still felt dangerous. She treated calm like something temporary. She hated asking for help, and when she did, she phrased it like an apology. When she got her first paycheck from a weekend job, she handed me an envelope at the kitchen table. For groceries, she said, eyes down. I took it, thanked her, and later placed every dollar into a savings account I opened in her name. A safety net, because children who grow up without one never stop searching for solid ground. Her writing changed too. It grew cleaner, sharper. The mess remained, but it was purposeful now. She learned how to cut a sentence until it said exactly what she meant. She learned how to let silence do some of the work. Small publications came first, then contests, then a scholarship letter that arrived on a Tuesday and sat unopened on the counter because she didn't trust good news that arrived quietly. We opened it together. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She sat down hard in the chair and covered her mouth with both hands like she needed to hold something inside. From that point on, people started saying her name differently. Teachers who once overlooked her now claimed they had always known. Invitations followed readings, panels, mentorship programs. Doors opened that hadn't existed before. Her biological parents noticed then. Her mother reached out first. Long messages, emotional apologies, carefully arranged explanations that sounded rehearsed. Mila read them slowly, asked me a few questions, then replied politely and briefly. Kind, distant, no anger, no accusations, just space. Her father tried next. Awkward texts, stiff compliments, invitations that felt like obligations. He spoke to her like an acquaintance, not a parent like someone hoping to attach himself to her momentum without revisiting the cost. Mila never yelled. She never demanded answers. She simply didn't reach. I understood that instinct completely. When you grow up begging not to be sent away, you don't waste energy begging adults to become different people. College came faster than I expected. A clear morning, a car packed neatly, nothing extra, nothing missing. I watched her pull out of the driveway and felt the familiar ache of letting go. But this time, it wasn't fear. She knew how to come back. College wasn't easy. Success rarely is for children who learned survival before confidence. She doubted herself constantly, questioned praise, assumed failure was always one mistake away, but she kept going. Her final year brought a nomination that made her laugh nervously and say, "This feels fake." Then an email that confirmed it wasn't. The ceremony was held in a downtown auditorium. Bright lights, formal clothes, photographers calling out directions, strangers congratulating her like they had always believed. I sat several rows back, hands folded, watching her move through the room with a calm I knew she'd practiced. Her parents were there, sitting together, smiling, leaning forward when her name was announced. As if they'd earned front row seats in her story, Mila walked onto the stage. She thanked her mentors, her editors, the program directors who had pushed her harder than she thought she could handle. Her voice was steady, measured, confident. Then she paused. Not the kind of pause meant for drama. The real kind, the one that pulls the air out of a room. "My mom saved my life," she said. She didn't say stepmother. She didn't say guardian. She didn't explain. She said my mom. I felt the shift before I saw it, the confusion, the recalibration, the applause rising like a wave. I watched faces in the second row change in unison. Blank, pale, tight. They clapped anyway. Everyone did. I didn't look at them after. I didn't need to. Back in the hotel room later that night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and removed my makeup slowly. The lights were harsh, the kind designed to make you confront yourself. My shoulders felt lighter than they had in years. Outside, the hallway buzzed with distant laughter and closing doors. Mila was somewhere downstairs answering questions, signing programs, smiling for photos, performing success the way the world expects. But I knew the truth. I knew about the suitcase, the fear, the nights she slept lightly, waiting for permission to stay. People love the loud parts of stories, the awards, the recognition, the moment where everything looks worth it. They don't talk about the years that came before, the paperwork, the waiting rooms, the quiet decisions no one applauds. Later, there was a soft knock on my door. "Are you okay?" Mila asked. I nodded. "I'm proud of you." She hesitated, then said, "I practiced that line for weeks." "Which one?" "The one where I called you my mom." She swallowed. "I was scared I'd mess it up." "You didn't," I said. She smiled then. "A real one, not the practiced kind." After she left, I lay awake thinking about the version of this story that almost happened. The one where I listened to everyone else. The one where I sent her away. The one where an 8-year-old learned permanently that adults only keep you when you're easy. Instead, I had chosen something quieter, not heroic, not dramatic, just staying. What came after that night wasn't dramatic. There were no confrontations, no public apologies, no long overdue reckonings that finally made everything feel fair. Life doesn't usually offer those. Success didn't erase Mila's past. It only gave it better lighting. She moved into her own place a year later. Small, quiet. Close enough to water that she could hear it at night if she left the window cracked. She said it helped her sleep. I didn't ask why. I already knew. Trauma doesn't disappear when people clap for you. It just learns new habits. She still startled at sudden noises. Still double-checked locks before bed. Still kept copies of important documents in more than one place. Once, I teased her gently that she was more prepared than most adults I knew. She smiled, then said quietly, "I just don't like being trapped." That word stayed with me. When journalists interviewed her, they asked about resilience, about inspiration, about how she overcame her childhood. They asked me what I'd done right, as if there were a formula, a checklist anyone could follow if they wanted the same outcome. I always gave the same answer. I stayed. Most people nodded politely. Some smiled. A few looked disappointed. They wanted something more impressive, a strategy, a secret, something that didn't require patience or discomfort. Staying doesn't photograph well. It doesn't fit neatly into captions. It doesn't feel powerful while you're doing it. Staying looks like repetition. Like answering the same fear over and over without snapping. Like showing up on days that feel ordinary and heavy and unrewarded. Like choosing the unremarkable path when no one is watching. Staying is boring. And boring love is what saved her. Years later, Mila had children of her own. I watched her carefully, not because I doubted her, but because I understood how heavy that responsibility felt to her. She held her babies like promises she was terrified of breaking. She planned everything. Schedules, backup plans, emergency contacts. She laughed easily, but she rested cautiously, like peace was something that might be taken away if she trusted it too much. One evening, after the kids were asleep, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what?" I asked. "Of messing them up," she said. "Of waking up one day and realizing I'm like them." She didn't have to explain who them was. I reached across the table and took her hand. "The fact that you're afraid of that," I said, "is exactly why you won't." She cried then. Not loudly, not dramatically, just tears sliding down her face like something inside her was finally loosening its grip. People think healing is loud, that it comes with closure speeches and confrontations and forgiveness delivered on cue. Sometimes healing is just realizing you don't pack a bag before going to sleep anymore. Her father reached out again when the grandchildren were born. Photos, messages, carefully worded apologies that circled accountability without ever landing on it. Mila responded politely, kindly, with distance. Some people mistake distance for cruelty. It isn't. Distance is a boundary built by someone who learned early what happens when you don't build one. He asked her once, "Why don't you need me?" She thought about it for a long moment before answering. "I needed you," she said. "I just learned how to survive without you." That conversation ended quietly. Years passed. Life settled into a rhythm that felt earned. One afternoon, Mila and I stood by the water behind our houses, watching her children throw rocks and count the ripples as they spread and disappeared. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd sent me away?" she asked. "I did. Of course I did. There was a version of this story," I said, "where I listened to everyone else." She nodded. "That version doesn't end well." "No," I agreed. "It doesn't." We stood there in silence for a while, listening to the water move. Life always keeps moving, whether you're ready or not. People love to rewrite history once success shows up. They say they always believed, always supported, always knew. Memory gets flexible when guilt is involved. Mine doesn't. I remember a small girl standing in my hallway with a broken suitcase and eyes that never stopped scanning for danger. I remember adults who called her difficult instead of hurt. I remember how close I came to folding under pressure that sounded like logic. And I remember choosing the unremarkable path, the one without applause, the one that required patience instead of praise. If you're listening to this and thinking of a child who feels too much, pause. Children aren't too much. They're reacting to too little. If you believe some children are worth staying for, even when it's hard, comment 1. If you think love should only be given when it's easy, comment 0. I read every response, because this story was never really about success. It was about the quiet moments where we decide who we are. Thank you for staying with me.